You are
doesn't know the territory. All right. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Trouble with a capital T, which rhymes with P, which stands for
with P, and that stands for pool.
podcast.
That's right.
Oh, we're live. You already clicked live.
We are live, but we still need to do the countdown so that we can go on Audacity. Oh shoot! What I always like to do here. Let me give you guys
going.
Here is the. I'm going to do a link here to the pop out. Well, for the long view, I've noticed that generally it's the audience is more interested, I think, in listening to it off the podcast, just because the actual recording process of it tends to be less. I don't know. I think that it takes a regular schedule to get a regular audience at a live recording. Does that make sense, guys?
I think you're right. But
doesn't the Cubist do it every Monday?
On tuning in.
Yeah, Cubist does it every Monday, and that was it really, like, I was on the Cubist last night, and it was a really lively chat. It reminded me a bit of what our Thursday night recordings can get with the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It just depends on whether or not we get, we've gone up to 10 guys before or so, and with that many people, it's a pretty lively chat. So theirs was lively and nice, and it was really a great experience. So very fun. All I'm doing here is typing in so I can get pop-out chat for you guys just in case. And I was kind of hoping to share this on the Good, the Board, or on the Longview Guild. So here is the link to pop-out chat for you guys, just in case.
So Jeff, for theme music for this one, I'm thinking about using Mission to Mars. What do you think?
Whatever you like is fine with me, my friend.
That's right. If there's any Mars movie you like.
Did you end up going with the Great Train Robbery music for the 18XX one?
I actually used the theme to the Wild Wild West, and it seemed to work really well for the 18XX.
Oh, you mean the Will Smith one?
The Will Smith one, yeah. It had like this epicness that I just couldn't resist. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to use this.
At least had something positive. As well as, like, a lot of people credit that movie with, like, doing a lot towards birthing steampunk.
Yeah.
Even though it's, like, pretty well panned by critics.
Oh yeah, it was panned, but it was entertaining. And I also used Tony Fryer like corrected you pronouncing some designer's name and then mispronounced it himself. So that is totally in the beginning. I like totally slashed that in with the whammy noise. It's fantastic.
Ready for liftoff in 3, 2, 1. Now only 8 months of cryo sleep. Or whatever, of hibernation before we arrive. I'm just typing in our chat. Let me get this on the Longview Guild. Okay?
Ready for liftoff? Yes.
Nice. 8 months of hibernation. I like that.
Yeah. I made a Mark Watney reference in our description. Yeah, there's all kinds of references out there for this one. I hope that this is the right link. I don't like the way that YouTube does their links for things. Killing me. You're killing me, Smalls. Anger, fear, hatred, technology.
Isn't technology great?
Oh, yes, it absolutely is, man. It's made so many things possible.
Yeah. Like frustrations with RSS feeds.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Goodness. Okay, let's see. It should go up this time because there was a dash in the feed, and I was like, well, usually when YouTube puts in a dash or a dot, it's not good. Anyway, what have I done? Okay, there it is. It's posted as a comment in the guild, so that way people can just see this live recording. If they were subscribed to it, they just got a notification on Board Game Geek. I tweeted out about it. If you guys would like to retweet that,
I'm on it.
That would cool.
There we go.
Cool beans.
Yep, I see.
It's
tweeted it. Awesome.
Tweeted. Okay, just trying to do my due diligence. Do my due Jillian. No, I didn't say that. All right, so here we go, guys. Audacity recording starting. Oh, wait, we should maybe talk. Jeff.
Hi.
I would rather you did the introduction here. How's that sound?
No, I've already done
Yes!
that. No, this
Okay,
is you guys
fine.
now. This is you
Okay.
guys now. All right, ready?
All right.
Here we go.
Well, TC, me or you? You want to do one?
Sure, I can
you
read
okay?
this and
All right,
screw
if
it
you
up.
wanna
I'm
do
game, man.
Yeah. I mean, if you screw anything up, TC, you just edit it in later. Just
God,
make
you know what?
sure.
I
that
already
it,
took your guys' advice to edit faster. That's how I got that 18XX episode. I was just like, screw it. I'm just taking all the pages out and just threw it out.
You have no idea, TC, how much stress you relieved from my life when you did that. That was incredible, and I appreciate it. And you're my hero.
So don't give me any more stuff to edit out because I'm like purging right now. I'm taking Jeff's advice. I'm taking your advice. I'm letting go. I'm just letting it go, man. I'm doing it as quick as possible.
Really appreciate that. And it doesn't always have to be like that, but just when we when we haven't released in a month, it's
when we gotta go, we gotta go.
Yeah.
All right, guys, here we go. All right,
Yep,
I'm gonna keep you on task because it's almost 9 o'clock and I gotta go to bed at some point.
Sure.
Yeah, you got it.
I'm starting my Audacity recording. I'm gonna do a countdown here, and we'll start the recording, and then you go ahead, TC. Okay? 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Long View. Today on the Long View, we have a very special guest. We're going to be discussing Terraforming Mars, a subject of much contention probably on Board Game Geek. And we have Geof Gambill himself to talk about it. Say hello, Jeff.
Howdy.
And of course, as always, I have my favorite co-host in the whole world, the guy I love to talk about rolling dice with. We have such lively discussions. I have my good friend, Joe Salin. Hey, Salin. Did I pronounce that right? Did I already screw up?
Well, you've already screwed up. It's Salin. You screwed up though.
Salin.
You screwed up when you said rolling. You said you love talking about rolling dice with me.
Yes, I do. It's my favorite pastime. It's like poke, poke, poke.
I think he does. He likes to irritate you a little bit.
That's all you gotta do.
In the world.
Terraforming Mars has no dice, so
I know, and it makes me sad. But it's what Jeff wanted to talk about, and I'm very excited to talk about it. Right, Jeff?
Absolutely. Well, I'm very happy to be on with you guys tonight and have enjoyed the episodes that you've been putting out for the Long View. I'm almost finished listening to the Twilight Imperium episode, and I've really enjoyed that discussion and hearing about the differences with the expansions that were added, because I have the 3rd edition, but I don't have any of the expansions. So it was really kind of interesting to hear about what gets added with whatever. It's like Shattered Empire, and then I don't know what the other one was. So that was a lot of fun hearing everybody talking about that, because gives me a little bit of a hankering to trying to get that back to the table. It's a one-of-a-kind game.
Well, as most people who probably know me know, that if I'm going to get something, I'm going all the way. And if it had expansions, I was going to get it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
you throw it all in, plus the kitchen sink.
I was like,
That's
that
right.
was cool.
That's
What does
right.
this do? Oh, I'm getting that too. And then my wife looks at the
Right.
bank account, and I get in trouble.
Yes, that's usually the way those things work. And I like Joe's comment, which was like, if a new expansion came out and it said that it now played with 16, would you play it that way? And TC was instantly like, yep, no problem. I would play it at 16. Exactly. More stuff. So, yeah, I mean, we're going to be talking about another epic kind of a game here, at least epic in its scope when we're talking about Terraforming Mars. So I'm really looking forward to talking about this one. This is a game that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I've played it a ton. Well over 100 times I've played this game. And that's because I was fortunate enough to be involved with some of the playtesting and, a little bit of, some might call it development, some might call it playtesting. There's a lot of debate that goes on in the board game community sometimes about, what is a developer, what is a playtester. Those are just labels. I don't care all that much. All that I know is that I was working with the designers who were great guys to deal with. And going back and forth and trying out different things, and just had a blast working on that game and then playing the game. And to me, one of the greatest things that I can say about Terraforming Mars is that, this is a game that after I kind of worked on it and play tested it or developed it or whatever you want to call it for so long, a lot of times by the time you're done doing all that work and playing a game that many times, when the game's finally published, you're kind of like, okay, this is really cool. I can like look at it on my shelf. There it is. Yeah, I kind of had a little bit of a hand in that. That's really cool. I'm proud of that. You know, good memories, good times. But I don't really need to play that anymore. You know, you get like a little burnout on a game. Terraforming Mars is probably the only one that I've ever worked on where I was just, I don't care. Like, I continue to play it. I played it just last weekend. So, you know, this is a game that continues to be hot for me and continues to make me excited to play it. So I'm really eager to talk with you guys about this tonight.
Wow. Yeah, I know. I have the feeling the fact that Chris's name's in the Liberty or Death rulebook, that has a really nice place on my shelf as well. And I break that sucker out every time we're playing a coin game. So I know the feeling is pretty cool. So why don't you tell us what we know it's Terraforming Mars. It's got, what's it ranked now on Board Game Geek? 7? And no,
I think it's number 7. Yeah.
Yeah, number 7. Wow, that's fantastic. And so for like
pretty close to number 6.
Yeah. And so like for the 5 people who don't know the game, maybe you can tell us, you know, what it is, who's designed it, and what you're trying to do.
Sure. You know, Terraforming Mars is a game that is all about the idea of humans in the future, and the not too distant future, going to Mars and then attempting to change the planet to make it habitable for people. And the game is going to kind of walk you through this process of raising the temperature of the planet, increasing the oxygen level of the planet, and then also getting like water, liquid water on the planet. All of these things, of course, that are very important for life to develop and to be able to sustain life. You know, getting an ecosystem going, getting plants to grow on the surface, which of course is going to contribute to the oxygen production in the atmosphere, and also, you know, trying to raise the temperature of the planet as well. So a lot of the sort of science behind the game is somewhat accurate. You know, there's some really interesting sort of ideas that people have floated out there about how to accomplish these goals. And the designer, who's Geof Gambill, he was able to kind of take that and fold it into the game, all of these theories, all of these ideas. So as you're playing the game, it really does give you that feeling of possibilities, you know, that this is something that might actually be possible, that you could almost imagine or envision seeing these things happen as the game unfolds. And so there's kind of this sense of story that develops as you watch the planet sort of grow in front of you and transform from a sort of a barren wasteland all the way up into, you know, this you know, area, this planet with, you know, forests and rivers and lakes and cities and you know, ecological zones and, you know, areas where there's mining. And so all of this stuff that kind of organically grows during the course of the game also kind of gives you that feeling of progression. And so it's a very, very, in my mind, thematic game that really does a great job of sort of telling the story of how we're going to turn this planet into something that, you know, a place where we could actually go and actually live. So the designers have a lot of very clever systems that they put into place in order to accomplish this. But at its heart, it's a relatively simple game. Which is one of the things that I remember initially made me extraordinarily excited about it. When I first saw the prototype of the game that was put together and sent over to Stronghold Games, I was very impressed with the quality of the prototype, but even more so, I was really impressed with what I saw in the game and the concepts in the game. And I remember looking at a friend of mine and friend of the show, Lloyd Keller, who was also one of the people involved with the playtesting and development, if you want to call it that, of this game. And he and I kind of looked at each other and we were just like, my God, this feels like a Phil Eklund game. It's so science, kind of sciencey and science heavy, and the things you're doing are sort of really interesting, and they're grounded in like real science, and yet it's really not difficult to kind of grasp this game. And I remember looking at Steven and saying, this is a Phil Eklund game for the rest of us. So like if you like the themes and the ideas that Phil Eklund tackles, but you struggle perhaps with trying to sort of grok the systems that he sets up. Well, here's a game that has so much of that feel that you get from a Phil Eklund game, but it's in a sort of a format that is very easy to teach and not that difficult to play, but very challenging to play well. And so that's a little bit about the game and, you know, sort of the background as to how I kind of first became involved with it. So, you know, from there, you know, we can talk about later on, guys, if you want, you know, the different systems in the game. I guess the last thing I should say is it's primarily a card-driven game. You're going to be dealing with hands of cards that are going to either have like a one-shot effect. They're going to have a sort of an immediate effect and then sort of build up a tableau, or they're going to be cards that are going to give you the ability to perform actions sort of over and over throughout the course of the game. So there's these different kinds of cards that you're going to be playing in front of you to accomplish those main goals of the game. Increase the oxygen, increase the temperature, get some, you know, greenery out there, get some water out there, and then see who did the best job in helping to terraform the red planet. So the last thing I guess I should say is that it is a bit of a race game, because once those global parameters have been hit, that's going to really signal the end of the game. And so there's a little bit of a race feel to it, especially as the game is getting ready to kind of end, where you're like, oh my gosh, you know, there's only so much time left, and I want to get this in, or I want to get this card down, or I want to get this last kind of forest planet out there, or I want to get this last city out there before the end of the game. And so there's that little kind of fun sort of tension element to it too. So those are, you know, the kind of main points that I would say if I was trying to describe the game that I would want to cover.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned the Phil Eklund thing, because I just want to point out to the listeners that the rule book is not as dense as any of those type of games. You can actually get through the rule book without having to go through so many subheadings and historical accuracies. And so don't want anybody listening to this podcast to get scared off the rule book, because it's, if you're comparing it to a Phil Eklund rule book, that's going to scare some people off. But it's a very clear and concise rule book, and I got through it without a whole lot of issues. And I believe the designer has a PhD as well, if I remember right.
Absolutely, yeah. As a matter of fact, it's the whole family that kind of, I mean, you know, Jacob is the lead designer, but I know, you know, his brother Enoch worked with him a lot with this, and really the whole family. I got to know the guys just a tiny bit through kind of Google Hangouts and conversations that we would have through email. And they're a big family. I think there's like, it's either 8 or 12 of them. They come from this enormous, you know, huge family. They all are very close. They all help each other. Sounds like just a lovely group of people, and my interactions with them have always been fantastic. And, you know, I think this was kind of a passion that they kind of shared and worked on together. But yeah, you know, Jacob himself, you know, I know has a background in the sciences, and he's also a teacher, which is another thing that kind of like, you know, clicked with me and him because, you know, we're both teachers, and I believe he's either a physicist or a chemist. I'm kind of actually flipping through the book here, the rule book, and here we are.
I don't recall.
On page 13. Yeah, he's a chemist. He has a doctoral degree in chemistry from Stockholm University. So, you know, this is really kind of a passion project of his, and you know, it was kind of neat to hear about how he and the family had really kicked this design around. Because I got to say, when the design came to Stronghold and came to my attention, it was already really solid. You know, this was a game that you know, we had to make some minor adjustments to, and it, you know, of course, it wasn't just me; it was all the other play testers that were out there, and you know, that they had sent the game to. So there was a lot of input, you know, and you know, to their credit, I mean, they listened to what we had to say. Some things they were like, nope. Other things they were like, that's interesting, we'll consider it. And other things they were like, yeah, that's a good idea, which is really all that you can hope for when you're working with a designer, is that they're going to be at least open and receptive. And so, you know, the game was already very solid. There were just a few little tweaks and things that needed to be done, and a few suggestions for, which kind of eventually became folded into the variants kind of thing. And I found it really interesting as I worked with them, to hear that some of the things that I at least know that I was coming back at them with and saying, "Ooh, have you ever thought about this? Have you considered this?" They were saying, "Well, yeah, we actually did consider that," or, "Yeah, that was something that we had kicked around, but we weren't sure." And so, to my mind, at least, that showed that we were kind of on the same wavelength there. But, they really had a rock solid design from the get-go, from the launching point, from when I got involved with it. And so it was more of a polishing kind of thing, and just taking off a few of the rough edges, because they had obviously put a lot of love and attention into the game.
Yeah, I can definitely, the impression I got, even looking at the box and then doing an initial playthrough, it was very much a passion project. I mean, to me, what made this game fly, and I think a large reason why it just climbed up the rankings as it did, was its theme. Of course, I think theme is huge in games, and this was such a unique theme that hadn't been tackled before in a board game. I think it tapped into something that people were looking for specifically, and then that was the initial allure to the game, because I've seen this game broken out with several groups who have no board game experience, who are passionate to play it just on the theme alone.
Yeah, the theme is definitely something that really just kind of grabbed me. So, Joe, you've been kind of quiet sitting over there, and I wanted your thoughts about. Yeah, I'm curious about whether
we're still on you're still on your development, okay? And this actually comes from one of our viewers here. That's asked me. Well, he asked in the chat here, what development, do you have any presence at all anymore with like the expansions or future releases of anything for Terraforming Mars anymore, Geof? Or was it mainly for that base game?
It was mainly for the base game. The guys had sent some stuff regarding the Hellas and Elysium board, and a little bit about Venus Next, but Venus was really in flux. It was really, that was something that there was a lot going on with, a lot of changes that were happening, and I kind of got lost in the shuffle on that. No fault of theirs, and really no fault of mine. It was just kind of life got in the way. So I really had nothing to do with those two things other than as a fan, so just last weekend I tried the Hellas side of the board, of the expansion board, and had a blast with that. Carter and I played a game of that and really liked, in particular, the new sort of milestones and awards that were kind of part of that, because it gave a slightly different feel and direction for the game, with just something so simple, which I really, really liked. And then the new elements of the map were a lot of fun. So I didn't really have anything to do with those. Can't take any credit for the good things that happened there in any way, shape, or form, small or large. So that's just me as a fanboy, just waiting with bated breath now for the Venus one to come out, and loving the expansion board.
Yeah, the expansion board looks fantastic. It just adds different milestones and different achievements. And correct me if I'm wrong, but is Venus Next like it's a different game where you're terraforming Venus, correct?
Well, it's not a different. It's not really a different game. What it's going to be, in my understanding, is there's like a small sideboard that's going to represent Venus, and then there's going to be cards that have to do with working on terraforming Venus as well.
Oh, okay.
So, that's something that I'm very interested in seeing. It's not going to be a totally new board. It's not going to be a totally new game. There's going to be some new corporations. There's going to be some new things and opportunities for you to kind of work on the terraforming, the beginning of terraforming of Venus. So, personally, what I'm really hoping for from the guys is I read a really interesting article in a science magazine, might have been National Geographic, I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was talking about the fact that one of the reasons that Mars has such difficulties when we're trying to think about it as a possible place that we might want to try to colonize is apparently it really doesn't have any sort of magnetic field around it. And so what happens is there's nothing to deflect the kind of solar radiation and solar rays around the planet or protect the planet from it, which is one of the reasons, I guess, why it's so heavily irradiated. Now, understand, I'm not an astrophysicist. This is my understanding of the article, and that this is one of the things that's going to be a persistent, huge issue for anybody trying to do anything on Mars. But the reason I was all geeked out about it was one of the things they had talked about was this sort of bipole that you could manufacture and theoretically put into space between, the sun and Mars at a certain distance from Mars that would generate a magnetic field large enough to deflect this kind of radiation and these solar particles, around the planet. So it's like a shield that they would put out in space that would protect the planet. And they said that if they did that, it would make, this huge change to the Martian environment. And I thought to myself, man, I wonder if the guys are planning on doing something with the magnetic field of this planet, like making it another parameter, something that you would have to work on is now not just the temperature and the oxygen and, water on the surface, but also trying to build up the magnetic field around the planet. I'm like, oh, that sounds like an expansion to me. So I don't know if they're doing anything. If they're not, and the guys are hearing this, that would be awesome. So let's do that. Let's make that happen.
Yeah,
let's make that happen.
That's the great thing about a game with the strong theme is it gets you interested in the subject beyond the game. And that's why me and Carissa like historical war games so much, because it just sparks that interest and you start looking for other things that tie into what you just played. I think that's fantastic, Geoff. And see, I learned something new too. And now I want to go out and read more on this because that sounds really awesome. Now,
yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in terms of development, one of the things I want to ask you I was really curious about is that when you get the game, it comes with like these variants. Like I think, isn't the card drafting a variant?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then like the corporations are a variant. And then there's like an expansion in there that unless you know to look for it to take it out. Was that, you said you suggested things to them, the designers, and when you was all that part of the initial design, or did you take that out to get people up and running on the game faster?
Well, one of the things that we talked about early on was the length of the game. The length of the game was a real concern to, I know, a lot of the publishers who were looking at it, some of the publishers that I spoke to, including, of course, Steven, but then also some others that were thinking about being partners and whatnot, that I had a couple conversations with. The game length was a big issue for them. It was this idea of, a 3-hour game, a 2.5-hour game. This is maybe a little bit outside of what our line usually is, or, what we're shooting for as far as an audience. And so there were suggestions that they had and suggestions that, we had, Lloyd and I about, all right, well, what can we do to kind of shorten the game? And the first big thing that we kind of bandied around and talked with them about was the idea of everybody starts with a production of one of every resource. And then if you have a corporation that grants you bonuses, you get that as well. And this was one of the things that I know they weren't super happy with, because to them, it nerfed, I think, in some ways, the corporations. In the original kind of format of the game, which is now called the corporate game, the corporate era, is you don't start with any production of anything.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing you get is your money at the start of every round. And so if you want to start building up steel production, or you want to start accumulating plants that you can, I envision them as like plants you're, developing in your greenhouse and getting ready to go out and try to transplant. And, you're trying to do all this stuff. You have to specifically get cards that are going to allow you to start your production or increase your production in those areas, which would include steel, titanium, energy, plants, and heat. Okay, so that makes the corporate era game a much more slow boil. So you start off with a lot of cards that might require you to have energy production in order to play them, or cards that would ask you, well, you have to lose some heat production in order to gain this production. This game's a lot about trade-offs and timing, actually, which is something that I don't think a lot of people quite really talk about enough in this game. We can talk about that later. But because you're not starting off with any production, you kind of have to like hold on to those cards. You have to wait. And so the game starts off in a much more slow, deliberate pace. Whether you're playing that way or you're playing this sort of shorter game variant where everybody starts off with production and everything, the game does accelerate as you go. It accelerates, it ramps up. You start off, your first few generations in this game very quick. You kind of look around like that was it, boy, that was fast. And then later on, you're doing, amazing numbers of things, and you have more money than you ever thought you could have, and resources and action cards. And, you're just going around the table, and then it becomes like, okay, when do I do these things? And what's the timing? What's the best way for me to do this? So it really, the game escalates, which is a wonderful thing for a game to do. But with that corporate era, things really started out much more slowly. So as a way to kind of try to knock down the game length, we suggested, and they had apparently already looked at this themselves as well, this idea of starting with production. So we went back and forth about that, and then that was decided that was going to be kind of the standard game. We were just going to do that for the standard game, and then the corporate era, you would start off with no production of anything. And that would be almost like an expert mode in the game, because the corporate era cards, which is a significant amount of cards that you would add to the deck, adds a huge amount of other options and a little bit more interaction, a little bit more in your face. The corporate area cards, a corporate era, I should say, not area. I don't even know what that is. The corporate era cards, a little more in your face and a little bit more interactive. And so that was kind of looked at as, okay, well, we can save that as kind of like an expert mode. So that's kind of the backstory from my perspective. Now, I have no idea what other developers were saying. We weren't all sort of like necessarily in a communal sort of chat. In other words, I kind of would report to Jacob and Enoch, and I know other people were reporting to them as well. But we didn't necessarily have a lot of interaction with each other, which may have actually been very smart on their part, because then you don't get groupthink.
Yeah, well,
you don't get...
Yeah, groupthink's bad, where you just all agree with each other.
Exactly. So I think that was a really good idea on their part, was kind of maybe insulate us from each other. So that's the one thing. The second thing was the draft. The draft was definitely an idea that they had when I talked to them about it, but it was one of those things that they felt added too much time to the game, in a game that was already long. Because you have to understand, I think Enoch's original vision, and he can certainly chime in and tell us if we're wrong if he listens to this, and I hope he will, is the idea that no, come on now. Come on now. Have a little faith, TC.
I do. I have faith. Jeff.
Anyway, if someone's talking about my baby and I hear that they're talking about my baby, you can bet I'm going to listen to it. That's all I got to say about that. But anyway, as far as I understand it, Enoch's original sort of vision of the game, I'm sorry, Jacob's, was the idea of, corporate era, no production to start, differentiation of player powers through corporations, and a draft. And it was going to be awesome. And when we had to start thinking about time considerations, things started getting stripped away. And then we started with, the idea of, okay, you just draw random cards from the deck and keep the ones you want to pay for every round. The game works in what are called generations. And at the start of every generation, you have what's called a research phase. And that's where you're going to draw cards from the deck. You're going to draw 4 cards. And then you are going to decide which ones you want to keep. You're going to pay $3 or, mega credits, they call them, a piece. in order to keep the cards that you want. So you can keep none, you can keep them all, you can keep however many you want, but you're going to have to pay for them. And that, of course, makes it difficult because all of these cool cards that you've gotten, you need to actually spend money in order to put them into play. So every time you take new cards that are amazing, and almost every card seems somewhat amazing, you know, you don't want to let anything go. What's going to end up happening is you're going to make yourself so poor you're not able to do anything. So once you've done your research phase, then you take actions. And this was a big change in the game. When the game originally came to us and Lloyd and I played it for the first time at the Stronghold there in New Jersey with Don Bonacore himself there, the way the game was originally structured was, on my turn, I take all the actions that I want or that I'm able to take, you know, putting as many cards into play as I want, doing whatever I want on the board or whatever I can afford on the board, and then my turn's done. And then you go. And then you do everything you want to do that generation. You know, that could be 2 actions. It could be 6 actions. Who knows? You do everything you want, and then you're done, and the next person goes. And the first thing is that Lloyd and I looked at each other and we're like, it's never gonna work because there's way too much downtime. So we were like, okay. So the first thing we suggested to you know, Jacob was, listen, you know, you just need to go round robin. Everybody takes an action. I take an action, then he takes an action, then she takes an action, and we keep going around until everybody passes. Once everybody has passed, the generation's over, you do another research phase and you continue, right? One of the things that happens at the end of a round is you get all your income, all your production, you get all your stuff. So it gives you resources to do things for the next generation. Okay, cool. So his suggestion, which I thought was a great one, was he came back and said, well, instead of 1, why don't we do, you can do 1 or 2. 1 or 2 actions on your turn. And this way you can sort of set yourself up to do something and then do it before the other players have a chance to react. Rather than signaling, it's like, I've put out my 8th greenery tile. What do you think that means? Oh, are you going for the gardener? Oh,
weird. Here comes a meteor.
Oh, look at me. Look at me. I've already got 8. Oh, I'll just claim the gardener before you. It's like, well, no. So his idea of saying 1 or 2, I think, was a great idea because that now lets you actually do those kind of combo moves where it's like, okay, you know, he just put out his 8th greenery tile, but that was his second action because his first action, he had to play this card, which allowed him to place this tile, which gave him 2 plants as a placement bonus for that tile on the board. So then he had the 8 plants he needed. And then he turned those 8 plants into a forest tile that he put out on Mars. But he didn't have the time to claim the milestone. So maybe what I can do is I can put out my 8th, and I have enough money to then claim that milestone out from under him on my turn. So you actually get the chance to be able to do things like that. Whereas if you're only doing 1 action at a time, then it really kind of comes down to, well, who started first? Because if you started first, you're probably going to have first crack at that, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. If all I can ever do is match you, I'm not going to be able to do anything about it. So I thought that was a Yeah, that
was a good point because I never really thought about that. The 2 actions really do prevent that, and the fact that never came up as an issue means I didn't have to think about it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think that was a really good improvement to the game. I think doing all your actions at once was just deadly. And, you know, that was an example of us coming back at them with an idea and saying, hey, we think you should do round robin. And they were like, okay, we had kicked that around before thinking about that, but I don't think round robin's going to work. But what if we try this? And so then we took that back and we tried that. And we're like, yeah, this is a winner. This is definitely the way this needs to go. So, yeah, really kind of a lot of fun to work with them about that because, you know, like I said, you got the feeling that they listened to you and valued the input that you were giving, which is really nice.
Well, yeah, it sounds like it resulted in a very polished game as well. I mean, like I said,
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
And one of the things I also wanted to address is that when I had a pretty miserable experience playing this the first time, but it was just like the flat out base game. And then, God bless his soul, Eric, he bought I bought a Meeple Realty kit, which fixed a lot of the component issues I had. And we threw everything in, the corporate, the draft, and everything. And at that point, I started playing it more. So I just want to encourage listeners that if they had a hump on the game and just tried the base and they were looking for something more, to get all those expansion cards, the draft variant, and throw it in and give it a shot, because it really sings without those. I mean, with them. And without them, I think that a lot of the crunch you can miss of the game.
Right. Yeah. No, I would definitely agree with that. And, again, one of the things that was, happening during that development process was the idea of the starting corporations and not doing the draft, so that it would be an easier entry point for people to get into the game. But I agree with you. Once you've done that once, I don't think you should ever do it again. I think it's something that at that point, man, you need to be off and running with the draft. And you need to be off. And I'll tell you, we even do a house rule kind of variant. We draft the initial 10 cards too.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, yeah. It's kind of, to me, it kind of feels like an Agricola draft. We draft those initial 10 cards because what we found is that when you do that, even though it's not in the rules and it is a house rule, it really does kind of seem to give everybody the ability to grab at least a few cards that are going to work together. So everybody starts off with something that they're going to be able to start working towards and building from the get-go.
Yeah,
and
you to recognize what
really
cards
like
you
that.
need. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Yeah. Once you kind of understand the engines in the game. So, those are kind of that's sort of a broad overview of a lot of the larger points of development and kind of where the playtesting kicked in and the back and forth. Until we kind of got, everything that we have now. I do also want to say, though, for the record, that I had absolutely nothing to do with the solo game, the solo variant. That was nothing that I even kicked around at all. So
Geof Gambill
that's all
washes
kudos
his
to somebody else.
No, it's just hands of that crap solo.
You're complaining about me, Jeff?
Who said it was? Who said it was?
I'm
crummy?
just kidding. I'm putting words right in your mouth, Jeff. Because it's
gracious.
I know a lot of people who like playing this solo. That's another strength. There's
I have no idea, guys. Do not take that comment seriously.
The solitaire variant does have a pretty strong component to it, and a lot of people do enjoy playing it. What I found amazing about this game is that a lot of the people who really liked Seven Wonders really took to this game. And one of my friends I game with, his wife just latched onto it, and she was a big Seven Wonders fan, and she treaded this game so easy. And she's the type of person who doesn't like playing multiple games, but likes playing the same game over and over and over and over. And she is really, really dangerously good at this game because she knows all the combos, she knows what to look for. So it's even a game that rewards multiple plays in a very satisfactorily. I mean, you can get a real kick out of. Once you know all the cards, you're like, well, I have this corporation. No, I'm doing something different I haven't done before. Got to look for these combos of cards to get them in and start executing them. And the timing of how you execute those cards, Jeff, I do agree. A lot of people don't realize how critical timing is, because you could set yourself up for something thinking you're going to claim something, and someone can just sweep in right from underneath you and take it. I've seen that happen quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. Timing is really important in the game. I would say that, the two biggest things that I would say about the game that I don't know that you get on the first, 2, 3, even 5 plays is how important timing is of when to play cards and when to, try to combo your 2 actions together. And the other thing that I think a lot of people miss in the game is that if you really want to do well in this game, you have to think about what I'm going to call your early game engine and your late game engine.
Mm-hmm.
Because the engines in this game, all right, that you're going to be building, that you're going to be crafting, are all going to be centered more than likely around something like raising the temperature and doing it really well, doing it really quickly, building up an energy and a heat engine that is going to be cranking out the heat so that you can raise that temperature every single turn, something like that.
There's like there's like secondary benefits for doing it. So if you like, I think it's the temperature that you get, you can like put oceans out and stuff. There's a benefit being the first person to fly up those tracks.
Yes. Yep. You get those secondary rewards. You're absolutely right about that. But what's eventually going to happen, and this is something that I've seen a lot of players struggle with now that we're kind of, I guess we're into a strategy kind of an area, because Joe has left us completely rudderless at this point. So way to go, Alan.
I'm steering it straight to the lighthouse, man. The lighthouse looks nice. We're going right to it.
Segues at all. Yeah, no, nothing. Just no Salon segues. We're just
you don't have any garbage segues. No,
we got realism
anyway.
Nope, dude.
So
I'm in
now
my
we're in the
8
strategy
months of hibernation here while we wait to get to the red planet. Radio.
Yeah, he is definitely radio silent.
I'm just here to troll you.
But silent running.
Silent running, yes. Okay, not so much from you. You could go back to being quiet.
Well, I tried to steer the ship. I hit the iceberg. That's great.
Nice
and that was the last time that
it'll
Joe
take you that long
did the long view.
What?
It will.
It'll take you that long, man. I'll go into hibernation here, and I'll come back, and you still won't be done with your turn.
Jeff, I'm really interested in the
strategies.
strategies.
Okay.
Can you discuss them? Can you discuss the strategies a bit? I'm very intrigued here.
Very intrigued. Yeah, this. I mean, at its core, like you have to have a couple of engines in mind when you play the game, because what's going to happen is if you get really, really good at raising the temperature, you have to understand other people are also going to be doing it. Maybe not as efficiently as you, maybe not as well as you, but they are going to be doing it. And before you know it, that temperature is going to be maxed. And once the temperature is maxed, all this heat is relatively worthless. Now, you can go for the Thermalist award at the end and try to have the most, most of those resources and, gets 5 points for it. But, whatever. You can stall. You can stall in the game, because if people kind of go for one thing, they're going to eventually hit the wall when that pegs. Because what happens is these 3 global parameters don't all tick up in the same fashion at the same rate. No. So there are some games where the temperature zooms and the oxygen lags. There are some times where, the oxygen and the temperature are climbing fine, but no one seems to be able to put out or wanting to put out any of the water. And so until that happens, the game can't end. And here I built this beautiful oxygen engine, and now the oxygen's pegged, and the game's not over. I'm in the lead, but the game's not over because the stupid oceans aren't out. Meanwhile, Terry's catching up to me because she's now got this animal engine over here that she's been working on with, flipping birds and cows and all this other stuff that she's brought to Mars. And, God forbid she gets fish. And then it's like, okay, so now, she's racking up the points and I can see them accumulating on her cards. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this one out. I got to end this game, but I can't end the game. What do I do? So to avoid that, you really have to develop 2 engines. You got to have one kind of primary engine that you're going to use in the early game. And that's usually going to focus around either plants, or it's going to focus around, temperature, oxygen. Plants and oxygen are tied together, or, something of that nature. Maybe trying to get cities out. Maybe we're going to try to be a big city builder of this game. Hey, let them put out all the greenery. I'm just going to plop cities in the middle of them all and get a bunch of free points at the end of the game. So you kind of have to have that first engine, but then you have to at some point decide when you're going to shift. And then you're going to have to shift to a secondary engine. And the cool thing about Terraforming Mars is your secondary engine isn't always clear in the beginning of the game. You have to kind of wait until you're almost approaching mid-game to see where the opportunities are going to be for points and what engine you want to try and shift towards. So hopefully you kind of, are working towards the right secondary engine, or maybe you're working on a card kind of an engine, a Jovian tag engine, where all right, I'm putting out these Jupiter cards, which are going to give me buku points at the end. So you have to have almost two engines in mind and able to execute them if you really want to have a chance at winning the game, at least in my opinion and my experience. So
yeah, and I would also add, you cannot ignore board state in this game. If you are not participating on the board and at least getting some points out of the board state, you're not going to be competitive. I've seen people just get. That's one of the things that's kind of neat about this game. You can see people get sucked into their engine and trying to work that thing like as hard as they can, and they really don't pay attention to the board state. And if you get someone playing that game that way, you've got them. You've got them. You cannot ignore board state in this game. It's really, really big.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. Unless you can figure out a way to get so many stinking points that you can be 40 points ahead at the end of the game, you're just not going to be able to do it. One of our listeners has a question, saying a large complaint that they've seen against the game is the take that cards that are in the game. And, was that ever an issue? That's a really interesting question, because the take that cards, for the most part, are either going to target your plants or they're going to target your energy production. Those are the two that seem to get pegged and pinged the most. I never had a problem with it, but one of the playtesting sessions that we did at a convention before the game was published, played a game with a gentleman, and he lost his mind over this. I mean, he was so upset, and he was just like, I spent all this time building this. It's taken me 8 turns to get these plants, and then somebody plops an asteroid and wipes out 3 of my plants, and now it's going to take me another 3 turns. And in a game where you have this much planning and this much, I can't believe that you would just take that, and you got to take that out of this game. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, all right.
Was that me that you were talking to, Geof?
No,
it wasn't me.
No, I don't. It wasn't you.
But my complaint was that it didn't do enough. If I'm throwing a meteor at the planet, I wanted to do a lot more destruction. But yeah, that's just me.
I just wanted them to affect like everybody, or to like change the game state for the whole group. I was a little bit put off by how they were like look at one player and poke them in the chest.
Well, there's a couple of things that you need to understand, which is that whenever you have a card that's going to take away resources, okay, from another player, all right, there's 2 things that I really kind of wanted to say to you as well, which is, if you're only producing 1 plant a turn, which is the base production that you started the game with, if you're playing the standard game, I got to tell you, that really isn't your engine. And if you're only producing 1, I don't know what to tell you. That can't be what your strategy is, because that means that every 8 generations, you get to put out 1 plant tile. So if that was your big plan, you're not really thinking right about the game at all. You're not approaching it right, okay? It should be a generation or maybe 2 delay in what you're doing. It should not derail your whole game, because you should be producing enough plants, if that's what you're going for, that all it did was nerf you, okay? Secondly, what I wanted to say to that player, and I would say to you, Joe, is that anytime a card says that you are going to take resources away, you can take them away from yourself if you feel like it. You can take them all away from a player, or you can feel free to distribute the pain. And that's something that a lot of people miss. And so if you really want to, fall on your own sword in the name of, solitaire parallel play, go for it. If that's what you want to do, because you can't handle any input from anybody else, then go for it. That's fine. If that's not your play style.
I played it wrong, because usually, all right, in the game that I played, it was just, I've got a card here that takes away plants. Who has the most plants? Oh, you do, because you've got an engine built where you're making 3 of them a turn. I'll take them from you. Or, it usually wasn't even take them. It was like, I'll destroy them for you. So
yeah,
I realized that I thought they were targeting a single player, but, if we played that wrong, then, I need to give it another shot.
Well, yeah, because I believe it said like the square, because it's a different color square on the card, correct? When it says
they're red,
and it doesn't say like if you had multiple squares on that, it doesn't say you got to hit one person. You could be like, I hit you, and oh, you over there, I take one from you, and oh, you over there, I take one from you. You could just be a butthead and just poke everyone, which is actually kind of cool,
right? It is, and at the most, it's an annoyance, and so I don't get, that would wreck the game for someone. Has it caused me to be like, dude, what the heck? Are you kidding me? Yes, I've had that reaction. Especially there's one card, I'm trying to remember what it is, where it like knocks your energy like production back like three.
Yes, I know that.
I mean, that's huge. And that's deadly. And it's like, seriously, dude, I just played 2 cards to get my energy production up by 3, and I paid a decent amount of change for it, and now you just blew that out. Okay, all right, I see how it is. And then, boy, the next asteroid or meteor card that I get, I wonder where that's going.
You're digging for that common card at that point.
yeah, I mean, all's fair, I mean, because the theme of the game is that the terraforming of this planet is almost like a competition between these sort of, huge corporations that are kind of competing to be the ones to, get the most contracts to develop, get the most money to develop the planet. And, they're all trying to outdo each other. And it's like, oops, I think one of the cards says, oops, sorry about that asteroid, Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, we meant to slam that down more in the southern polar region, but it looks like it drifted a little. Sorry, And I mean, that to me is part of the theme of the game, too. This is, if anything, I think sometimes the game is too safe. There's not enough of getting smacked around by the planet or the other players. But that's just maybe because that's my play style.
I agree with you, Geoff. I think there's not a ton of interacting you can do with other players that can feel like smacking them around, and not just smacking them around, but like, because the game is so card driven, like, it's forms of interaction are like, you almost don't even understand that other players are interacting with you. Like if somebody hate drafts a card, here in Terraforming Mars, they're actually going to be getting paid to hate draft. Every card is either money or keep the card, but you basically are giving up money if you keep a card in every situation. So, it behooves you to deprive players that are downwind of you of any cards that would work with what they are developing their engine to acquire and whatnot. I think those are good points worth mentioning in terms of like the interaction. The interaction is not something that you can really react to or even really necessarily understand happened, just because when you've got drafting in that type of a game, it really is kind of like Seven Wonders. It's you can just all of a sudden look down at your tableau and be like, holy crap, I do not have a single gray resource. And then the person to your left is like laughing maniacally.
I wonder who that would be.
Oh man, it would be you, TC. I can already see it.
Like I said, that it's funny, Geoff, that you bring up that someone would say that that ruined the game. From when the first few times I played, I'm holding a comet and I want this to be like a freaking extinction level event, right? I'm like, yeah, it's a comet, and it just like wipes some trees. I'm like, oh man, that's a little sad. But it's kind of funny that someone would like have the opposite reaction where it was too mean. I was like, well, this really isn't mean that much, but okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a good point, Joe, which is that a lot of the interaction in the game really is that subtle interaction of hate drafting. Of, because just because you hate draft a card doesn't mean you have to keep it. I can take a card that is, I can take a card that is perfect for you and just discard it. And it may or may not cycle back.
In any given round, Geoff, you're only going to be, you get what, 4 cards that you could keep. And in a general round, you're only usually keeping 1 or 2. It's rare that people keep 3 or 4 cards.
And that stack of cards is huge you're pulling from. It's a monster stack of cards.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and I'm just sitting here because the question about the resource removal is still floating around out there. And so I'm referencing back in the rule book because it says remove up to X number of plants from any player. Singular instead of plural is the point, which is interesting because it says resources or production without red frames always affect yourself. Resources or productions with a red frame means that you can affect any player you choose, even yourself. But again, we are dealing with a player singular, but that's very interesting because it would be funny if I'd been playing the thing wrong for 100 plus games. So that would be hilarious. But
we broke the
it is like 225 cards in the game. So
yes, when it says any player that you choose, I as far as I knew, that meant any player. But it is, the word player is singular. It doesn't say players, plural. So maybe we can get a little clarification looking through the forums on that, or maybe Enoch will want to chime in, because that would be kind of hilarious if I had that rule wrong in a sad kind of
well, you're not the one.
Getting you were playing it. Way. No, well, I would think like you're playing it in a way that makes more sense to you. And I think, it might make more sense thematically, but mechanically being able to take from multiple players prevents me from at least griping and saying like, oh, well, what's the point when, why go for plant production? Why go for energy production when those are things that people can interact with and there's literally nothing I can do about it? Like there's not any like blocking cards in the game.
No, not at all. Mm-hmm. No, there's no way to block that comet, Joe. But here's the thing. When the comet comes for you, Joe, why don't you ask the Yucatan how I can block the comet, okay?
You gotta do the Bruce Willis thing, man. You gotta like jump onto the asteroid, split it in 2,
yes,
and
Steve Buscemi.
Yes. You gotta ride that nuke.
Save that guy.
Right. You gotta save him because he's the best.
That way he can dump Jennifer Garner. What a wonderful individual.
That's right.
Yeah.
How is that even possible? I mean, unless she eats puppies, and nobody knows. Like, she's just carving up puppies.
Joe derails. That's funny.
Ben, eat this puppy with me. I don't know. I don't know that I would ever. I don't see that happening. But that's just me.
I have had success here. I've played the take that card in podcasting form onto Geoff and gotten him onto talking about why.
You're not talking about Armageddon, okay?
I did. I brought up Armageddon.
Armageddon.
Okay.
You did.
What a reference, man! I'm embarrassed.
Oh yeah.
So Joe, how do you really feel about the game? How do you really feel about the game?
Oh my goodness! I don't.
No, it's not even. Well, hold on, guys. I don't have much experience with the game. That's my honest to God. The reason that I'm not saying much is my experience with the game is very limited. And Geoff, you are by far more prepared to talk about it than I am. So, who am I to mention any gripes I've had in one play of it? And it's given a lot of people a lot of entertainment. I am actually, you guys mentioned that, to mention some positives, I did quite like the benchmarks or whatever they're called, the achievements that you go for. Like, that's a cool system.
Yeah, it's really neat. I like it.
And you only play with certain ones, right? Or is it...
It's just a maximum of 3 of each of the milestones, and 3 of the awards can be claimed and or funded in any given game.
Okay,
so whether you're playing with 2 players or whether you're playing with full complement of players makes no difference. Only 3 of those on each side are going to be claimed or achieved. Okay. So there's a little bit of that race aspect there as well. I want to be the first one to put out enough buildings to claim the builder, or... I've been buying lots of cards, so I'm going to go for the planner. So what really is kind of a fun negative moment in the game is like, okay, I need to have X number of cards. What is it, 30? How many cards do you need for the 18 for the planner or something like that? It's a horrible number of cards that you need to have bought. And the reason I don't know is because I have never gone for it ever. But I did watch a game where, you know, an individual I was playing with, she was going for it and she was ready to do it. You know, but what happened was, you know, the player before her claimed the third one. And so she's left with this enormous handful of cards and she's just looking at them. And she realizes now she can't claim that thing. And she's like, well, I guess I'm just going to sell a bunch of cards now. And so, you know, she got back a third of her value. You know, wow, just kind of crazy.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Wait a minute, here we go.
Going for an achievement and having it when you're like this, you can't get it because someone swiped it. Oh, that's such a nasty feeling to have.
It is. It is. All right. So here it says in a BGG post, we're going back to the resources thing. Jonathan Frixelis says, yes, for simplicity, each negative effect can only target one player. Well, I'm going to call that a house rule because I don't like that, because that makes me wrong and I can't be wrong. So therefore, sorry, Jonathan.
Don't ask me to edit that out, please.
No, that's fine. That's fine, man. I mean, you know, these things happen. These things happen. Even when you play a game as many times as you have, you know, if you read a certain phrase one way and somebody reads it another, that's what forums are for. That's what FAQs are for. And, you know, the interesting thing to me, to kind of go back to what you had said earlier, I think it was, TC, is that for the sheer number of cards in this game, and the crazy things that some of them do, it's amazing that that doesn't happen more often.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I think that's kind of a testament to the fact that, you know, they really went over those cards with kind of a fine-tooth comb. And I know we looked at them, you know, as well. So, yeah. I mean, this, you know, it's just a fascinating kind of game, and then balancing all those cards, you know, crazy to balance those cards. But you know, there's some interesting math behind the cards, and I think it's important for people to understand that there is math behind these cards, because there are some cards that seem more expensive than they should be, or seem less expensive than they should be, but you know, those guys really did have a sort of a cost benefit analysis that they did for each card mathematically, which is one of the things that I think is a reason that the game works as well as it does. And it has to do with the balance between, you know, does the card give you points? Does the card give you production? Does the card cost you production? Does the card cost this much money? You know, does the card have global parameter requirements before you can even play it? Like, for example, I mentioned Fish earlier in passing. Fish is an incredibly powerful card. I think every stinking cube that you put on there is like 2 victory points. However, Fish come out extremely late in the game most of the time, because you have to have a lot of water on the planet before you can even put the fish out. So to try to get a bunch of cubes on a fish card is going to be extremely difficult for anybody. So while the card might look a little overpowered at first glance, it's not. Then there are other cards that, like, you know, wow, you know, increase your heat production by 4. Well, what did it cost you? Because the way that they constructed the math behind the game, it is either going to cost you a lot in terms of money, or it's going to cost you in resource reduction in other areas of your production. So, okay, I'm gaining heat, but I'm losing this. And so there's always a balancing act, or it's going to be that timing restriction that is going to nerf the power of the card. So they did a great job, as far as I'm concerned, as well as, you know, all of the people who play tested and developed, at kind of, you know, making sure that those cards actually worked.
So I have another question for you, Geof. Ready? Do you have any inserts to use over your resource sheet, or do you just play it without any. Because one of the big gripes I had was I couldn't keep all my cubes separated on that mat, and I had a friend who actually bought an insert for it. And
you're one of those guys, huh?
Well, I know. I'm just saying it helped a lot.
You're one of those guys.
Yeah, I know.
Those guys, huh?
I'm sorry. I'll retract my question. I'm sorry. Sorry.
But here's what I got to say about the player mats. All right, here's the deal. I too was underwhelmed by the player mats. Okay. I too saw the danger in stuff getting bumped or jostled and then having to remember what was where. In practical application, all the times I played this game in playtesting, all the times I played it when I first got the game, it happened once. And we were able to reconstruct that player's board pretty accurately because I don't know about you guys, but when I'm playing this game, I'm watching what everybody else is doing. I'm pretty aware of how many plants you're producing. I'm pretty aware of about where your energy and heat production and, you know, titanium production is, especially if you're playing a bunch of space cards on me. I'm watching that titanium production. I'm seeing where you are. I'm also looking at, towards awards at the end of the game, and saying, oh, maybe they're going for this award and I have to keep track of how many cubes they have of titanium and steel or, so I never really saw it be a problem except once. And it was pretty easy to correct. I know in conversations with Steven that he liked the cardstock because it lays absolutely flat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to me, I was kind of like, I would rather see them be cardboard. I would rather see them be nice, thick cardboard, like you see in all these other games. And I'll be honest with you, I've played a lot of the other games, and those boards tend to spin because they don't sit perfectly flat. And when they spin and you try to stop them from spinning, that's when bad things happen. So, and then, of course, everybody has to bring up Scythe. Well, why couldn't she have had boards with recessed little spots to put the cubes?
Yeah,
gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
That would have added a lot of cost to the game. I think, Steven will kill me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it would be somewhere around $5 to $7 per game minimum in order to do that. And you have to understand, like any game, I kind of personally felt this was going to be a winner. I thought it was going to be a game that was going to be big. I didn't think it was going to be this big, but I thought it was going to be big. But there were plenty of other people out there who looked at this game and said, this is a niche market. This is a game that I don't know. It's too long. It might be too techy. The tableau of cards that you build is huge. I don't know. And so to invest the amount of money that would be needed when you're not running a Kickstarter, Stronghold just puts, Stronghold is Steven, puts up his money to produce the game as a partner for Fricks Games and putting it out there and handling North American distribution and everything else that Steven is handling, really worldwide distribution outside of Europe, as far as I know. That's a huge gamble. It's a huge risk for a publisher to take. Whereas when you do a Kickstarter like Jamie does so beautifully, I mean, you cannot fault Jamie Stegmaier for how he runs Kickstarters. You have real-time information about your funding. And so then these things become possible. Ooh, well, would you guys, who are backing this game, would you like this? Because I can make this a stretch goal. And now, okay, we're going to raise over $1 million for Scythe. Okay, well, that's not a big deal. But when you're putting up your own money and you don't know how much money you're going to get back in revenue, to then add on to the price point of a game that's already going to be at a $60 kind of MSRP game, I just don't know that he could have made that decision.
It is already higher. Yeah. It's like 70, 75. I mean, I understand the perspective here. It was, do you choose to go with a cardstock or do you choose to go with cardboard? And it seems like the choice was pretty clear because cardboard does tend to warp, like you've mentioned, and they can spin because they don't sit flat. So I do think, though, that we can point to a lot of other games that have these like recessed player boards, or just even a player board that had holes in it. I think there would be, a way to do the graphic design so that it was at least just a cardboard cutout that had little punches, like tiny little squares that you punch through. I do think, that might have worked a little bit, but I totally see what you're getting at here. Like, people can gripe all they want, yes, but it's functional to the point where people are buying it. So if you're going to gripe that much.
And there's options if you like the game to correct it. I mean, I've played with the meatability insert, and the fantastic thing about that thing, other than having to go to a wood shop to figure out how to glue the thing together, is that it comes with like a little Mars rover, so you can play with it when it's not your turn. So
very cool. Very cool.
So there's options out there.
And absolutely. And in all honesty, guys, the last thing that I was going to say about that, Joe, is that despite all of that defense of the decisions that I think were made, I still have a alternate solution myself. I use these player boards from a company called Game Trays, where the cubes sit down in the little things, and so. Yeah, I mean, it's a really nice upgrade. It's a really nice thing to have, and I don't think there's anyone who would argue that point. I think the only argument is, should Stronghold and the other publishing partners for this game have taken on that extra component expense before they knew what the game was, how the game was going to be received? Because, it's really hard. I was just listening to the last episode of Board Games Insider, which is a podcast that Ignacy Chevicek from Portal Games and Stephen Bonacore run. And they were talking about this kind of thing. They were talking about how there's really almost no metrics in the board gaming hobby to give people, like the publishers, an idea of how the game's going to sell until it's released. Like once it's released, then you're gonna know pretty quickly, and you're either gonna get roasted for not having made enough copies, or you're gonna have made tons of copies and people decide that the game is not for them, and now you have a warehouse where you're paying storage fees in order to have these games that you're going to be selling at a discount bargain bin for the next 10 years until you get rid of them all, because there is no more Tanga that will sell you 20 of a game in a carton for $15.
No.
So
an interesting point, though, to bring up, Ignacy himself is now running pre-orders, but he does his own pre-order system on his website. So, I mean, yes, this metric is definitely part of what prevents players from, or prevents the market from being really easy to predict. I think, though, that like when I look at these complaints and whatnot, Steven is really largely, and I think this happens a lot of the times, like with sleeves. Like very rarely does a publisher ever include sleeves in a game. The only one
bring that up.
Yeah, Ultra Pro has done it, and when they did that, I almost feel like they decided that the card quality didn't matter since they were including sleeves in the game that I got from them. But anyway, yeah. So, but generally, these companies, for these sorts of upgrades, leave it to the third market. Now, after the response, that has been so strongly negative on people griping about the player boards getting bumped, and could Steven have the second edition of Terraforming Mars come with maybe a more streamlined, mass-produced, not quite as nice version of the game trays, and then offer that as like a $10 upgrade to anybody who still has the first edition? I mean, that's something that I think there's space on the market for that, but I honestly don't think it's I always get a little bit frustrated when somebody complains. I think that component comments and complaints are worth mentioning. It's very rare that they're game breaking. I guess when people have an entire game that they can't quite reset, especially if it's a 2.5-hour game and like somebody bumped the table and they're like, well, I'm not quite sure where it was at. I suppose that would be really frustrating, but I feel still like, anytime somebody's basing their opinion on the pieces in the game, like, this is the long view. We're not here talking about like the collector's editions of the Power Rangers toys that came out like in the mid 90s and stuff, you know, like I'm not talking about how many opposable pieces there were in this amazing Megazord and whatnot. It's, you know, the mechanics are not so much of the pieces themselves, but rather of the way that the game works. So
hey, you're talking to a war gamer who clips his own chits, okay? So,
well, how many tweezers do you keep in your?
man, I have a little I clip edges on all my chits, and I've got I thought it's like what you're saying. It's like expecting like Fantasy Flight to provide sleeves in the game for free, essentially, right? Like, no, you let if you like the game that much, there's a secondary market, so you can pimp it out to your heart's content. But the base
absolutely
is there, and if you can play it,
I mean,
it is.
You know, TC, to just kind of emphasize your point about this sort of secondary market. I mean, geez, have you guys seen the modeled 3D tiles that people have made, and you can apparently, I guess, order? That are like these 3D printed.
Yeah.
Oh God, amazing. You know,
I mean, what specifically, Geoff, you can explain what they refer to for people that aren't familiar with Terraforming Mars. Like, there are cards in the game that, like the meteor card or the toxic waste dump site card, that specifically affect, you know, like a tile, and they're persistent. Like, once it gets put there, it stays there. And so, generally, the included tiles in the game are, in my opinion, very functional. Like, I mean, there is
absolutely
an included tile for the toxic waste dump site that has a unique look that's not on any other token. It's just, you know, that is absolutely easy to point at and say that's not necessary. That is a you know, like a fanatic, or what would you say, like a fan?
Absolutely,
that's a fan.
But it's awesome. It's awesome.
It's awesome.
But again, to expect that in your game, of course, would be ridiculous. So, yeah, I mean, I totally get what you guys are saying about that. But what I'm saying is that I agree with TC that if you're a big enough fan of a game, there's probably something out there that you can completely sort of upgrade it and make it something truly special with, if that's really what you're looking for. So I also wanted to bring up another couple points here from the chat. Carmen from Game Surplus. Hi, Carmen. Awesome that he's able to join us, because we haven't even mentioned the fact yet that Game Surplus is, of course, the sponsor of the Longview, and has been for as long as the Longview's been around. And so one of the things that I think makes Game Surplus really special is the fact that, you know, they're very active in the community. I mean, here we are recording, and, you know, Carmen is chiming in with comments while we're recording and talking about this game. You know, that's not something that is designed to increase his sales. This isn't a gambit. This is just, he's a fan of games. And so he wants to sit and listen and talk and contribute and join in the conversation. So welcome to Carmen. And also thanks, of course, to, you know, the other listener who's been chiming in, CDOGW, who's been chiming in with great questions and caught me apparently on a rules mistake that I've made for over 100 plays, but that's okay. I won't hold it against. So Carmen, you know, chimes in and says, hey, you know, wanting the lowest price point, that's a real thing too. And, you know, this is one of those things where, you know, a publisher really has to decide, you know, what price point do I want to set this game at? Because that's going to determine you know, a barrier for certain people who are going to really have a difficult time coming up with $75 or $80 or $100 for a game. And so I think that's definitely a valid point as well. I also want to point out that this is a game that Steven had partially done here in the United States with LudoFact USA. And so there's a lot of the components of the game that still came from China, the little resource cubes and things, the plastics. But when it comes to the cards and stuff like that, it's my understanding that all that stuff is now being printed at LudoFact USA, which is right here in the United States. And so, you know, I think the price point might be a little bit higher than if it was being printed in China. However, the benefit of that is the time to market. So, and this is something that I actually, you know, talked with Steven about. I don't think he would have a problem with me sharing it, is the idea that when you print, in China, you're going to have this long turnaround time before the game can hit the market. Whereas if he's printing here in the United States, it might be a little bit more expensive from a labor standpoint, but you're saving on some shipping costs for sure, and you're able to quickly get those games out into the market. Whereas you're not having to wait for containers to come and then clear customs. There are some of us who've backed Kickstarters and stuff who remember the port strikes that were going on out on the West Coast that kind of ground everything to a halt because there weren't any workers to unload these ships. And so, those are the kind of things that can really have a huge effect on a game and how a game is released. Whereas if you're printing here in the United States, that's going to make it a whole lot easier for people here in the US to get games and reprints churned out really quickly. Because the U.S. is a very, very large chunk of the market for board games now, which is an awesome thing. And then, of course, Europe is a huge market still. You have a growing market in Asia, but it is a growing market. So, you have one of the smallest markets for board games, as I understand it, being the center for printing and production is inherently difficult when you're looking at logistics and timing and trying to get games out. So
yeah, the real winners in that are the shipping companies in that
absolutely
environment.
Yeah. And I also want to point out to another comment that was talking about cardboard warping is definitely real, is what CDOGW said. You type your name in there so I can at least call you by a name instead of CDOGW.
C-Dog, yeah.
C-Dog with a W.
C-Dog.
Now, I'm sorry, I'm too old to be that hip. Anyway, listen. He wrote this comment. It says, it's definitely real. The Lisboa boards are fantastic, but are definitely prone to the bend. Cullen, thank you. And that's absolutely true. I mean, I look at the Lisboa boards. They have a beautiful insert that Eagle Griffin designed. It's perfect. Everything fits beautifully. Those player boards sit flat and snug, and you're like, oh, what a thing of beauty. And then you look at the backs of the player boards. The player boards have like a raised strip there that's like a stop for cards, because you're supposed to tuck cards under the player board. So there's a gap so that you don't have to lift the player board. You can tuck your cards under. And there's a stop that goes across to stop the cards so they go into precisely the exact right depth. And I'm looking at this, I'm saying, oh, this is awesome. What attention to detail. Bravo, Eagle Griffin. But they warp. And so the stops don't work. And you go to slide the cards under, and they slide all the way under. Or they slide 3/4, and you're like, wow, what a darn shame. Like, this is a beautiful product, beautifully designed, beautifully, thought out, and they thought of everything. And yet, maybe I'd rather have a cardboard mat, because these beautiful things aren't working. The cards don't stop, and they spin. And in a game like Lisboa, that is this, hog of real estate, you really can't afford to have your player board spinning. I'll tell you that right now. So I think there's definitely something to do. There's definitely something to that. And then, of course, one of you said the only thing worse is melting dice, which, of course, was the whole quantum problem.
Weird.
Which is really
stories, man. I would like my hands it would stick. I could almost take my finger, touch the die on the table, and hold up my finger and lift it up with it was. And the printing would smear off. I mean, these component issues they happen, And I feel like the reason that it breeds an interesting discussion is because we're talking about a well-established game producer, publisher that has jumped onto the market with a huge splash because of how well produced the first game Stronghold ever made was, Survive, with all the different thicknesses of cardboard tiles.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see that very often with different thicknesses of cardboard tiles. I mean, it gave an actual three-dimensional aspect to the actual map of Atlantis. I mean, you're talking about a company that does know how to do pieces, but no matter who they are, you're talking about small markets and unpredictable markets. And you know what these extra added upgrades are? They're risk. Carmen said it best, tremendous risk. you know what? Go buy yourself a board, but don't tell me whether or not I should buy this game because the components are
Yeah,
Here's
I hear you, Joe.
Let's talk about the art, though, which ranges from anything from like a really beautiful card that reminds me of something that, you know, like a futuristic, something that could be in maybe Shadowrun Crossfire, to
a picture of a dog.
What's up?
A picture of a dog.
It's
a picture of a dog.
Come on. It's a Yorkie, I think.
That's a Yorkie. I'm sorry, picture of a Yorkie.
Yeah, it's actual picture of a Yorkie, like somebody's like phone picture of a Yorkie to like some sort of flying, like the next flying frog, you know, Last Night on Earth.
Come on, that's harsh. That's really harsh.
Hey, you know
Joe.
what? The problem with it is not the art itself. It's just that it has that Dominion sort of issue. There's 225 cards with all unique art, and the thing is, it's inconsistent. But you know what? It's functional, right?
Yeah, it works.
It is. It works.
And I'd rather have crappy artwork than the card that breaks the game, to be honest.
Yeah. That's true. That's very true. And let me say this about the art, because this was another thing that we discussed. Okay, so I shouldn't say we discussed it. It was kind of like I threw it out there, and I don't even know if it made it to Jacob and Enoch, and I think Bonacor looked at me and was just like, no. Because, you know, my idea was, unified artwork on the cards. I get it. I get why people want that. I get why they think that would make the game better from a visual or aesthetic standpoint. I get that. But what my suggestion was, okay, why don't we do like really cool, like scientific illustrations on all the cards, like those scientific drawings, almost like the blueprint looking sort of drawings for all of the cards. And it'll be really cool. It'll be really amazing. And I remember Steven looking at me and saying, do you have any idea how much that art will cost? And I was just like, no. And he said, a lot. And I said, okay, then. And so, you know, I think what the guys did, you know, again, you know, like Carmen has brought up, cost. So, yeah, okay, let's take a look at a game that does have custom art, beautiful art in another Stronghold game, since we're talking about Stronghold, Core Worlds, original art, fantastic art on those cards. Love the art on those cards. But how many cards are you talking about there versus how many cards you're talking about with Terraforming Mars? And the fact that Terraforming Mars, every card, like a Phil Eklund game, because nobody picked up on that thread. Thank you very much. I don't know why. It was an excellent thread. Other than TC freaking out, thinking everyone's going to run away from the game because they would think that it was a Phil Eklund rulebook. Anyway, so like I think about Pax Porfiriana, where every card is unique, and Pax Pamir with Cole Worley, and
they're
Phil
able to use art that is like public domain art, right?
Exactly,
I mean, it's historical.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas, this game, Core Worlds, much smaller set of cards. You can afford to hire an artist to try to execute that. But when you look at the stack of cards for Terraforming Mars, especially once you put in that corporate era deck, it's incredibly cost prohibitive. There's just no way that they could have taken my idea or anybody else's idea and said, yeah, let's run with that. Now, as the number 7 game on Board Game Geek, could somebody pull a Glory to Rome Black Box edition? Hate to bring that up because some people hate that. But could somebody do a redesign of the cards and the player boards and put out a deluxeified, kind of edition that would have all of these bells and whistles? Absolutely. I'm sure it could be done. And I'm sure that there would be a small percentage of people who would be willing to pay $100 or $125 for the game. I'm sure. But again, the key word in that sentence is a small percentage of people, really dedicated fans of the game, who the game has an emotional attachment for them, are going to shell out that kind of money. The rest of the people are going to look at that and say, there's really nothing that wrong with the one I have. And so again, I don't know how you approach that as a publisher.
I know that really I, tough. For one, do not care about the 8-inch plastic ship version of Container, deluxeified, $75 or $100. It's like, I've played Container. I don't need these giant, like, I don't even want the big boxes. I just want, when a game has a few components that I can point to and be like, this is well made. I like the way that this integrates into the system. I like just how functional it is, how it really works. It sets the stage for the game, but it doesn't go overboard. It's not like, we're going to do this huge. And that's, to me, not only is it unwise from a business perspective, but I'm not looking to fill my shelf with a bunch of one-of-a-kind, only got through one Kickstarter thing. I honestly want to have a game collection people can come play and be like, okay, where can I find it? And I'll be like, well, this edition you'll find nowhere.
It spent hundreds of dollars on eBay.
That's the War of the Ring Collector's Edition phenomenon, right?
We don't even. I just show it to you.
$600 game of Catan. Like, he has a game of Catan that's all individually like resin pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Each tile is like that thick and all individually painted. I mean, it's ridiculous. And the thing is, like, he got that as a wedding present. And when I heard that, I was like, that's awesome, man. That's a great wedding present for somebody to give you if they know, if they want to give you a really big, impactful present. But, that's what it's for. It's for, like, I would never buy that for myself. I'll take it as a gift. But I don't want that guilt. That is guilt, dude.
I hate Catan. Oh, that looks cool.
I'm not going to look my wife in the eye and tell her, honey, yes, the Porsche in the garage is totally something that we can both share in. It's not, no.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of truth to that, too. I agree. Cullen brought up another point. He said, hey, for people out there who are complaining about the card art, it could have been like the latest Godfather game, which I have not seen, but Cullen says it has the same picture on every single card. So that, is that really better?
Or it could have been like Table Battles from Hollandspiel, which Andy's now onto this kick of, I mean, bless his heart, but these cards do not have artwork. They are just text. It is text on a card, man. That's it. Like, you could just not have it. And then how would you feel, huh? Then we can say, this is why we can't have nice things.
And it's all your fault, Joe.
It is. It's always Joe's fault.
It just comes back to me.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. That's exactly. All right, let's get off the components and get back to
I
the
would
game.
appreciate that. Yeah.
So, does Carmen or Cullen or anybody else out there listening, if there's any kind of specific questions that anybody has, about the game, I'd be happy to answer them. Suffice it to say that my thing about this game is this: the game plays out differently every time I play it. Now, that sounds weird in a game where you're always trying to accomplish the same three things, but it's the journey. How you get there is what makes the game so compelling. And the other thing that makes the games, to me, so compelling is the sense of, like, accomplishment that I feel when I look down at my tableau of cards at the end of a game or near the end of a game, and I think about, I built it, like, I did this. Like, this is a game that, yeah, there's a few take that cards in there for sure, but this is a game that you really do feel like you are making things happen, that you are being productive, that you are working towards a goal. And there is a very positive feeling. My wife says that a lot too. She talks about how she likes games where you're building things, not necessarily games where you're tearing things up or tearing each other down, but where you're building. And when you can look back and say, I did that, I remember placing that city there. I remember that forest tile there. Look at all these pets that all my people have in all their cities. There's the Yorkie card. It's the pets card, right? My people must be happy with all these pets, running around on Mars, and then somebody else is just like, dude, I put cows on Mars. And you're like, yes, you did. It's like, it's a cool story, and the story kind of unfolds differently. And the fact that you can try so many different approaches, so many different engines. You can go for tag engines with milestones and achievements and awards. You can go for the sort of engines we've talked about with heat or with plants or with oxygen. You can go for your blue cards. My son loves to just build as many action cards as he can because he has so much fun manipulating the action cards. He's like, I'm going to use this card to add microbes to this card, and then those microbes can be turned into this, and then I can turn that in to raise the oxygen level by this, and then this card over here I get to put another animal on, and then this animal eats that animal, and now it's a more valuable animal because now I have predators which will eat these other worthless little animals, and over here are my cows, and here's the pets. And it's like he builds a zoo. Like, that's one of his favorite strategies is the dude builds a zoo,
Well, I know if I ever play with your son, I know exactly what to hate draft. I'll take $3 for this card.
Amoebas. I want to have that.
There's the Yorkie. Oh, yeah. There goes the friendly little
I'm gonna take the regolith eaters. Yeah. Really, really neat stuff. And so that feeling of building, of accomplishment, that feeling of discovery, of one of the things I love about Terraforming Mars is the same thing that I love. I'm trying to think, what's the other game? There's another game that's jumping into my mind, but it's on the periphery. I can't remember exactly what it is.
Give me more than that.
It's a game where I'm sorry. Even though I hate the artwork on the cards and I don't like the artwork on the board, love the miniatures in Blood Rage. When you draft cards in Blood Rage, every single card that I get in Blood Rage, I'm like, it's an amazing card. Look at this one. Oh man, that's a +4 card. Look at this card. It lets me do this. No, I want this card. And you can't have them all. Like, you just can't have all those things. No one should be that lucky. And so you have to pick which one you really, really, really want, and then pass along the others to other people at the table, wondering who's going to take that other amazing card and then beat you over the head with it. And
you pass it, you know it's coming. Exactly.
And Terraforming Mars has a lot of that same feeling to me, where it's like every card I get, I'm like, ooh, that card will work with this. Ooh. No, wait, if I have this, then that will let me raise this production by that. That will then let me put this out, and then I can claim that milestone. This card's amazing. I got to have this card. No, wait, this card. Wait, this card's got a Jovian tag, and if I get this and that, and so it's like every card you get, you're thinking, oh wait, this is the stupid air filters card. It just gives me 2 victory points. I love this card. It's cheap. I want this card too. No matter what card you're looking at, they're all pretty much useful. They might be expensive, but they're all pretty cool. And again, I love that feeling of I'm picking from a handful of great options. They might not sync exactly with the strategy that I had, that I'm going down right now, but boy, they're going to work for that secondary engine I'm building.
Yeah.
Or boy, this card would have been so good for TC, and I'm just going to bury it. I'm going to bury it deader than dead. And he's never going to see it. It's never going to see the light of day. And I'm so happy about that.
Discard it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is the thing that, to me makes the game so infinitely replayable. And now with the new boards, again, I almost could care less about the bonuses on the new boards as far as the placement bonuses and the subtle differences in geography. Kind of don't care. To me, those new boards are all about the new milestones and achievements, because that just opens up whole new ways for my brain to kind of think about this game and what am I going to try to accomplish. So my gosh, I mean, you could do as many of those as you could if you bisect the planet as many ways as you want, I guess, and come up with all sorts of different boards. So, again, absolutely love that about the game, is that such little subtle things can have a big impact on my thoughts, not necessarily like a huge impact on the end result, but it's a huge, because you're still talking about 5 points, whether it's 5 points for being the forest dude, or whether it's 5 points for Oh geez, now I'm drawing a complete blank on some of the new achievements. A 5-point achievement for something on the new board, it's still only 5 points. Is my point? There we go. I said the word point a lot in that sentence. Point.
What are you pointing
only dot. No, it's still it's still only 5 points, but that gets me to think about the game and the cards I'm going to draft in a completely different way, is what I'm trying to say there, in a very inelegant way. Okay, so let's see. Joe has jumped in, and he says he's going to blame Carmen because it's late. Cullen has said that the solo game is awesome. Glad to hear the solo game is awesome, Cullen. I haven't had any experience with it, but I will be more than happy to take your word for that. Let's see. Joe says he can't ever get him to play a game. So Joe can't get Carmen to play a game with him. That's sad, Joe. You tell Carmen I said
do it.
He needs to stop being such a busy bee and play some games. You know what I'm saying? Carmen,
that comes straight
all work
from Jeff.
That's right. All work and no play.
Well,
preview Joe sad.
Here. Let's makes Joe a sad. Yeah, dull boy. Yeah, that's the thing is, you and Carmen are about to head over to Essen, and I have a feeling that Carmen is probably going to be all work and no play. So you make sure he's not a very dull boy, because you guys are going to be joining the Good, the Bored, and the Ugly, and we only have TC in on that episode too, man. We just might just make that like a giant bunch of like 4 of us that just listen.
I'll just be like, they're Euros. I'll take your word for
other stuff.
Oh, please.
Oh, TC. Already, shame on you for that.
Goodness gracious, man.
No, I'm really excited to hear what you guys hear.
Oh, I'm sure he's excited after that comment. Did you hear that, Carmen? That was crazy. That was crazy.
Well, I would just say after all this, I know that I have a very good friend in Mars, and his name is Geof Gambill.
I have many great friends in Rome. Yeah, while we're talking about Essen, I just want to say thanks to Carmen out there, who was nice enough to say, hey, if you can make the trip over to Essen, I've got some spare room in the room. And I'm just like, really? And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, and they got an amazing breakfast buffet. They'll pack you a bag lunch. You got breakfast and lunch,
Jesus,
if you want, from this hotel. And I'm just like, oh, tell me more, Carmen. And he's like, you don't have to tell me, anything right now, but maybe, if you can get to Essen, maybe you can come this year, and I'd be happy to, let you shack up with me. And shacking up with Carmen has been high on my wish list, more of a bucket list really than anything else.
I'm sorry, Carmen.
I've just been looking for an opportunity to get him alone in a foreign country.
Are you sure you want to do this episode, Joe?
Yippee, says like Carmen. But
I should be getting something. Yeah, I definitely feel very much like where is this? Where's the love for me?
I swear to God, every time the 3 of us are on, it goes this way.
So what I'm saying is, no, and in all seriousness, I'm very grateful to Carmen for making that offer. It's something that I would probably never have the opportunity to do, without his support. And the fact that he was willing to make that offer after I'm kind of officially like out of the long view and sort of done with it. You guys have taken over for me and are continuing with the mission, and Game Surplus is supporting that mission, which is just a point of real satisfaction for me to see that move forward. I'm just very grateful, to him and Elaine for, giving that opportunity, so that I can cross that off my bucket list. Going to Essen is something that I always kind of wanted to do, but wasn't sure it would ever actually happen. So that was pretty awesome. So definitely something that I'm looking forward to. So, oh yeah. And Carmen said that when we were at the WBC, Joe, who had joined us, to tell you
not me, Joe in the chat.
Joe. Yeah, Joe Potager, if I'm saying that right. He had a brand new copy of High Frontier 3rd edition that he left in the room with Carmen. And I have been trying to get that game, guys. I bid like an obscene amount of money. I'm not even going to tell you the amount of money I bid on that game when I saw it in an auction. And I'm kind of glad I didn't win it, because then I definitely could not go to Essen, because I would have spent all my money on High Frontier 3rd edition. But yeah, apparently Joe left it and Carmen had it and gave it back to him. So just more proof that Carmen's a good guy, because I would be like, oh no, man, maybe housekeeping took that, knocked on the door, housekeeping, and I saw High Frontier and took off with it for the High Frontier. But Carmen gave it back to Joe, which is awesome. Joe also wanted to know if I knew about Carmen's hidden fees, and no, I don't know anything about those hidden fees. But maybe I will have to sleep with the lights on, as Carmen had suggested.
High Frontier may be a fee here, the way you're just.
I don't know. But Joe was hoping he would have had a chance to teach the game with WBC. But sadly, Joe did not ask me, because I would have been like, absolutely, because Joe knows the game. And so learning a Phil Eklund game from somebody who knows the game is the only way to go. Like, I've learned 2 Eklund games over Skype. One with Martin Griffiths, who taught me Pax Porfiriana, and one with another gentleman whose the BGG avatar name is Holmes. I can't remember his actual name. I'm very sorry about that, but he taught me Origins years ago and got me through that because, as TC said, Phil's rule books can be a little dense and difficult, to say the least. This game to me had the feeling of that Eklund experience, with the sciencey nature and the individual cards and all of the awesomeness that you get, that feeling when you're playing the game. But yeah, the rules and the gameplay are nothing like what you would expect from a Sierra Madre game. But anyway, I digress.
I'd like to point out that apparently our Hansa Teutonica episode's fairly legendary. According to the
Hansa
chat here.
Teutonica, yeah, that's a good one. That was a good one. Trying to get Joe to explain.
Jeff decided that he was going to do the long view and do his best to make sure that making the long view of Hansa Teutonica was impossible.
Oh my God, that was such an awesome episode.
It was so much fun. It was because it's difficult. It was difficult, I think.
This
for
game
Joe.
has no soul. It's lacking soul.
I think it was difficult for Joe to try to dress up a piece of Melba toast.
Oh man, I was watching that
this
shit
episode
go.
of Terraforming Mars is not yet over, sir.
Oh my goodness,
I have been so good. I have been so well behaved. Please,
you
let
have.
me
You
keep
have.
that.
You even gave me the wheelhouse for all the good it did.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we have talked about this game for a while, and there's so much more we could talk about. We could talk about individual corporations and what ones, are, personal favorites of mine or whatever. And I mean, that would be fine. But there's actually people who have sort of analyzed and put into tiers the different corporations based on their relative strength. And I mean, there's so much information out there about this game. That's why I really wanted to kind of spend the time talking about my experience with the game and also why I love the game so much. Even though the game is number 7 and you're thinking, well, why does the game need more love? I think it needs more love. I mean, I think it's a game that if you play it a few times, you're going to get it. You're going to start to feel that excitement that I'm talking about. You're going to feel the escalation of the gameplay and the rush towards the finish. And you're going to think maybe you're too far behind, but because, like TC said, you've built up a good board state presence, you've got lots of cities and stuff out there, all of a sudden you're neck and neck, and then you pull out a 2-point win. There's just nothing like it. So it's definitely something that I would recommend highly to people. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the guys come out with in the future as future expansions for the game, just to continue to add to it. Including, cool things like the magnetic field of the planet. Hint, hint, hint. Okay.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts from you there, TC? Sorry, I interrupted you.
My final thoughts for the game is, like I said, I had a really bad experience the first time I played it, and I almost didn't play it again, but I had someone who did, and because of that, his better half played it, and we've played it quite a bit, and I'm really glad I got a chance to play it multiple times. And I think it deserves its place at number 7. I think the theme is really good, and if you like, I would say if you like drafting games, if you like Seven Wonders, if you like, you brought up Blood Rage, which is a great comparison. This is a good game. It's great. I can't. If you'd asked me a few months ago, I thought about it, you'd had a very different opinion than the one I have now.
Yeah, well, repeated play is something that's definitely needed to really wrap your mind around it and for the game to shine. What about you, Joe? I know you said you haven't had a lot of experience. Have we convinced you to try it again?
No.
Well, that house rule made me think a little bit more positively, but I once was told something by a very wise person, and that was, if a publisher, if you don't say something about a game, like the negativity that you could throw towards a game is really going to reflect back onto you. But what you need to make very clear to your audience is that when you say nothing about a game, that they should understand what that means.
So is this like the passive aggressive parade where you're telling me that you really don't like Terraforming Mars, but you haven't challenged me on it?
I'm gonna limit myself here.
Dude.
Limit myself here to 30 seconds.
I will get I will give you like minutes to tell me what you don't like about the game. Go ahead. And action.
Okay, so first, I'm just gonna go negatives here. It's
don't
all
start
negatives.
whining about those 3 plants again. Don't start whining about those 3 plants again. That's all I'm saying.
Is that an iceberg heading towards, guys?
So here's my biggest issue with the game is that it's a tableau builder that plays out in potentially several hours, and I just think that because of the balance of the cards, I can't argue with, but the fact that all of those cards are situational in one aspect. Like some of them are better to come up early, some are better to come up later, some are better depending on what you've already built. I think that drafting 4 cards does very little to fix that. I think that you end up very often turning into the top deck hero. And I think that just how it's the wild, wild west. It's hard to shuffle 225 cards into one giant stack. Like it's got that Millennium Blades problem of like, okay, these are sleeved cards. We got to do this in like 4 different like.
Are you really complaining about the amount of cards you have to shuffle? I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this. Go for it.
Here's what I think though. It's like Seven Wonders was a comparison that TC said earlier, and I think it's aptly fitting because what does Seven Wonders do? Seven Wonders has age 1, age 2, and age 3. I think Terraforming Mars could benefit from something like that. I don't feel like the fact that I get this like 40 cost card or a bunch of fish cards, like you don't have the spots in your hand early game, for a lot of these things. So I want these cards to come up later. I want them to come up in a different format than just draft 4. 4 is a very small amount of cards to draft. I think it lends itself to a much lighter aspect. The actual difference in the cards very largely is tied to its theme, and mechanically is like this type of resource gives you 1, this type of resource gives you 2, this type of resource gives you 3, this type of resource gives you the plants. Well, we're not allowed to talk about the plants. Jeff made those off limits. Okay, we're not going to talk about the energy either. But anyway, the way that those cards interact is really cosmetic in a lot of ways. And as much as the theme, the hard science was really, I think that is the clear selling point of the game. That's the clear market hole, the gap that's been filled. But for me, it doesn't sell it on its mechanisms, because if I'm going to play a space game that's tableau building, I'm going to play Race for the Galaxy. And Race for the Galaxy is going to largely give me the same sort of tableau feeling with the same sort of problems, that this card is better early, this card is better late. And it's going to play in 15 minutes to 45 minutes if I'm, playing with 2 players and very experienced players. So, and it's going to give me that space feeling. Like I look down, and you should watch the Shut Up and Sit Down review on A Race for the Galaxy, because they walk you through. It's like, this is my space empire in 12 cards. It's really got a lot there to unpack. And I think that Terraforming Mars is a lot more explicit and a lot more like inspired by the science, and that really interests people. And I think that, like you said, Geoff, you're right in saying it's a Phil Eklund game for the rest of us, but it lacks the opacity that has drawn me to the few Phil Eklund games that have really captivated me. That's my take on Terraforming Mars. I'm not going to talk about the take that cards. We've already talked that. I'm not going to kick a dead horse. It's, that's my perspective. And I appreciate you giving me the chance to say it. And now I'm going to just let loose on me.
You're gonna duck? Is that what you're saying? You're gonna duck?
Yeah, I'm waiting for the hail of comets, man. But there's no blocking it. There's no blocking it.
You only lose 2 plants.
Here's all right. Listen, where to even begin? All right.
Well, just say I'm wrong about everything. Here's fake news and move on, dude.
I get some of the things that you're saying, but one of the biggest complaints that you have expressed there is this idea of I get a card that is of no use to me now, and it's a late game card and I don't need that now. Or I get a card late in the game that I can't even play now because the conditions that are on the card aren't even really valid. There's no point in me playing this card except for another building tag. Or there's no point in me playing this card except for, it gives me an earth tag or something like that. I get that. But where I think you're wrong about it, perhaps, or where I have a different perspective, I'll be nice. Where I have a different perspective.
I'm surprised I get that much, man.
Is this?
Jeff's in a great mood because he's going to DC.
Well, I had a nice glass of rye while I was sitting here recording this episode, so I'm feeling a little mellow. So here's the deal. Listen to me. This is the important point. Isn't that input variability? The fact that you're not guaranteed, because believe it or not, we discussed the idea of 3 different kind of eras or different decks. We discussed having the decks arranged by cost, a low cost deck, a mid cost deck, a high cost deck. We discussed those kinds of ideas. Those kinds of ideas were kicked around. But here's the thing. If you want to keep the game from being scripted, if you want to keep the game from feeling samey after 5, 10, 15 plays, you really can't do that. The input variety of not knowing exactly what cards you're going to get forces you to do 2 things simultaneously, which I love. Forces you to make important tactical decisions. And it also forces you to consider, maybe I am going to put that 36 mega credit card in my hand in the first turn of the game, and I'm just going to sit on it and I'm going to wait. And I'm going to make that part of my long-term strategy. Let me give you an example. I had cards in my initial draft that made me really think I was going to go for a strong heat engine, all right, an energy and heat engine. But I knew that would only take me so far. And one of the cards that I drafted early in the game, in the second round, second generation of the game, was the insulation card. And the insulation card says, take you can basically take every bit of heat production that you have and turn it into mega credit production. And so for the rest of the game, I held that card in my sweaty hand, knowing that as soon as I tapped out my temperature, I was going to surprise everybody by playing insulation. Because I jacked my heat. My heat production was something insane, like 16. Okay. Wow. And I took that, turned it all into mega credit production in one fell swoop with one cheapo card that I had been holding on to the entire game, knowing this was the moment I was going to do it. And now I just started pooping out cities like you wouldn't believe, because I had so much income every round. I'm just like, I'm going to put a city here. I'm going to put a city there. Oh, look at that nice forest you have. I'm putting a city right there, right next to it. Oh, look at that little spot. Oh, you were thinking of putting a city there, weren't you? Well, guess what? I just put the city there instead. And I ended up poaching so many points on the board that I had that opportunity because of that insulation card that I held on to for almost the entire game. I mean, that's strategy,
Well,
you know?
I
That's
agree, Jeff,
long-term
but
strategy, Joe. And
I understand. I want that card though to be in like age 1, so that way your long-term strategy cards are in age 1, and that way you can see people planning for things. And you're like, oh my goodness, that's what they're going for. And then the game hopefully would allow you some sort of way to interact, because that was another point that I kind of brought up earlier, and I think I hinted at, alluded to, is that aside from these take that cards that we've clarified, without the house rule, they are take that cards. Without those, the game is very much interactive only through the card draft. And I understand what you're saying, Jeff. I like
and it's
that.
interactive through the board and the board positioning. You know, it's definitely interactive there. And I get what you're saying there, Joe, but I also think that this is one of the things that you need to play the game a little bit more. And when I say you, it's a general you, not you personally. You need to play the game enough to also understand that a perfectly valid thing for you to do is to draft your 4 cards, look at them and say, I don't need any of these, and just dump them all and save your money and use that money for other stuff that you're going to do. People also have a tendency to ignore the standard projects. The standard projects are not necessarily as optimal as getting to do it cheaply with a card, but they can be devastating in terms of gameplay if you really need, you know, I don't know how many times I've listened to people whine and complain, I'm not getting any energy cards. Why can't I get an energy card? You're taking all the energy cards. Really? Why don't you just build some freaking power plants? You have enough money. What's wrong with you? Like, it's right there in front of you. Just go ahead and do it.
I've seen the
because
same thing with cities. They complain about not having cities. I'm like, it's right there. You can buy it.
Yep. And because because there's so much going on in the game, I think people miss things like that. And so, you know, you're talking about, you know, for example, the card draw and the fact that we don't have different decks as a negative. I look at it as a feature of the game because it keeps it fresh and it keeps the game from being samey, and it gives me challenges that I have to overcome.
I understand those challenges. I think that if you did have them in specific decks, though, it would lay bare that, you know, these 225 different cards really boiled down to there's like 8 different suits where they kind of apply to a specific, like, this is your green suit that applies to like plant production and being able to like turn plants into other things or increase your plant production. You take these 8 different sort of quote unquote suits, and then you can even further dissect the cards within the suits as like, this is one that you want to get early to get you production. This is one that you want to get in the middle that gets you conversion. This is one you want to get later that gets you points. And I mean, you see that it's like, without all these cards shuffled together, a lot of the the luster of the game boils down to like, you know, I can see here that this is the strategy I play when I'm playing this deck, and I'm not dependent on that, you know, that thing, you know, what's coming out of the deck. Like you said, Jeff, it is input randomness, but it's an input randomness that I would actually prefer some forms of output randomness too. You know, like the mitigation that's present there is, you know, you've played a lot more, so I'm sure, Jeff, that there's a lot of things that I'm not seeing. It's just, you know, the amount of cards that are there. It's, you know, like you said, it's part of the drawing aspect. So obviously it was a great decision to do what they did. You know, how many people are there like me that got lost in that decision? Probably not very many, but I'm glad I at least get to be the curmudgeon for once.
You did a good job, Joe. Go for it.
You did a good job. You did a good job. But I actually think your description of what would happen if you sectioned off the decks is actually the argument for not doing that. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, what I think, you know, you're saying, well, the cards are just all about either increasing this production or decreasing that production or gaining this and losing that, or losing that and, you know, going up here. You know, I think, number one, there's a lot of games you could say that about. You know, I don't find that to be anything unusual. And I think if you want to have a game that has some math behind it, in order to keep things balanced, you're probably going to see that. What I think people miss is that the trade-offs that you're being asked to make is a way to keep things from turning into a runaway leader problem. If I'm getting a card that's going to give me an increase of 3 energy, that in energy production, that's huge. So I have to be pinged somewhere else, because if I'm not losing something else, now I have the potential to be dominant, not only in energy, which of course lends itself directly almost to heat, literally 1 for 1, but I'm also dominant now in plants. And so that's where the timing aspect of the game comes in that I talked about is, when do you shift gears? This is a car that has multiple gears, and you have to decide when to shift those gears. And there's always going to be a cost to the benefit that you're getting. And you have to make the decision at that time as the player, is this cost going to be worth the benefit that I'm getting? And, to me, that's not a flaw. To me, that's a feature, because otherwise it really would be a case where if I happen to draw or get the right cards, I'm just going to run away with the game, and no one's going to be able to keep up with me, because I now have the capability of building 3 dominant engines before anyone else can build 1, and the game's over, and people get frustrated. Nobody wants to play. So what the game asks you to do is make choices. What do I want to do right now? Or what do I think I'm going to want to do in 6 generations from now? And, that's your either tactical decisions that you're making at the time, or your long-term strategic plan for that particular game. And so to me, while I understand from a gameplay effect standpoint, you're not seeing a huge amount of variety in what the cards are going to do for you, when you choose to do it and when the cards come out, and how you hoard certain cards and let others go. Those are all the decisions. In your video series, the Salin Coefficient, you often talk about this idea of what are the decisions that the game is going to require me to make as being one of the measures of a really good or perhaps great game. And I don't want a game where the decisions that I have feel kind of meaningless to me. Whereas in this game, the net effect might be, well, all you did was increase this production and decrease that production. Well, whoop-de-doo. Well, yeah, but I had to make that decision. And that decision was made for very specific reasons, because it's going to help me win this game in this way. And then later, I'm going to abandon that when I've played that out, and I'm going to go over to here. Now, the last thing I'm going to say is to address your point about saying, well, you wish that everybody could see what, other people were building towards or working towards, so that you could kind of prepare for it. Well, to me, thematically, that's a non-starter, because I don't know any corporations that just say, hey, guys, guess what I'm going to do? Here's our corporate plan for the next 50 years. You feel free to take a look at it and see if you can stop us. No. Nobody knew I had that installation card in my hand.
Geof Gambill,
and when I threw that out,
complaint with a thematic basis. Thank you.
You betcha, baby.
Thank you, sir. That's right,
you
man.
Betcha.
Because theme. Jazz hands.
Theme. Theme is not a bad word, my friend.
No,
theme is not a bad word.
It's not, but because theme,
it's what keeps the game from being Melba toast.
Melba toast.
It's what, oh, thank you. Thank you
Very
much.
There's no brioche buns here, my friend.
Oh, God.
Melba toast, okay?
Some chewed down rib bones.
That's right. Just some chewed on rib bones, stripped bare on Melba toast. And on that note, guys, it's 11 o'clock.
Yeah,
and I think
oh, goodness. It's been
Jeff,
great
thanks for
having you
being
here,
on,
Jeff.
man. It's been great. I've been really wanting to talk about Terraforming Mars since I hit a pivot point on it and started playing it more. So thanks for being on.
No problem. It was a pleasure, TC. Always fun to talk to the two of you.
Yeah. How about you, Joe? Want to say
Love
anything?
you, Jeff, man. Hey, be safe over there in Essen.
Joe's got nothing to say.
No, I think I already did.
Dude, can you guys hear me? What?
Oh yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. That when you said that, I'm like, oh no, am I muted?
No.
You were. Okay. No, that was a great discussion, man. It was a blast, and I'm just telling you, seriously, like, be safe in Essen. Have a great time. Tell me all about it. And you too, Carmen.
And thanks to everybody out there who was listening tonight, to Carmen, to Joe, to Cullen, everybody who was kind of chiming in there. I appreciate all the comments and appreciate you guys sticking with us while we recorded this little festival here. And I would just encourage anybody who is listening, of course, first and foremost, to check out The Long View and listen to what TC and Joe have coming. They have a latest episode that's featuring some great 18xx titles, plus the Twilight Imperium episode. Just putting out some great content in the Longview tradition there, and I appreciate that.
Like Hansa Toast.
Hansa Toast, yes, not Melba Toast.
Thanks for that one, Joe. That's what comments are for, man. That's what the chat is for. Hansa
That's
Toast.
Good stuff. Yep, as a way to poke at and then
I will eat my Hansa Toast, and I'm gonna like.
And we got some great stuff coming up too.
And you're gonna chip your tooth on it too. So yeah, I mean the guys. I appreciate you guys carrying on the mission there, and I would also encourage people to go and check out The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly. This is another podcast on Punchboard Media. Both The Longview and The Good, the Bored, and the Ugly are proud members of Punchboard Media. You should go check them out. There's tons of great content creators there. And of course, a special thanks to our sponsor, Game Surplus. Carmen and I are going to be heading over to Essen. He's going to be bringing back some titles. He's pre-ordered lots of Essen titles that are going to be flooding in, very soon after the Essen Spiel Fair. And so, if you're looking for Essen releases, I would definitely check out GameSurplus.com. Every year they get stuff in. They seem to always get it before anybody else. And they're not going to pull what some online retailers will do, which is say, "Ooh, this is rare, so let me charge you, $180 for it." When it's a $40 game. So, there are certainly costs to bringing games over, but Game Surplus, going all the way back from Carmen to Velma and back to Thor, have always been super gracious about saying, hey, I could maximize my profit. I could get people to pay an awful lot for these games because there are people out there, me included, who love to be the ones to check out the newest, greatest, and latest stuff. But you know what? I don't need to do that to people. And so I'm going to charge what I need to charge, a fair price for everybody, and get the games out to you quickly. So check out GameSurplus.com at any time, but especially this time of year as well. If you do decide to order from them, be sure to tell them that you were referred from the Longview, and be sure to reach out on the guilds if you have any comments or questions about this, and see if you can maybe spot something else that I screwed up in my 100+ plays of the game.
That was epic, dude. That was epic.
That's good stuff.
I played it wrong. I played
That's
it wrong.
Whatever.
I like you
anyway,
better, dude. I've learned
I
that
know
myself
you do
after
because you're
Dozen.
so worried about 3 plans.
Oh my goodness, man! It's like you
unbelievable,
resent that
dude.
I like your rule, and you even said like,
Unbelievable.
I know, you resent that I like that.
But it's not necessary. But it's not necessary. And this is the thing that kills me. You said it yourself. You look over and you're like, ooh, how many plans do you have? Oh, you have 8. How many plans do you have? Oh, you have 2. How many do you have? Oh, you have 3. Oh, well, I'm going to hit the guy with 8. Yeah, of course you are. Why wouldn't you? You're going to hit the guy. You're going to smack the guy around with 2? Of course you're going to hit the guy with 8.
Sure, I'm going to hit him. Joe hit the guy with 8. I'm hitting Joe with 2.
And chances are the dude who's got 8 is probably producing 2 or 3 around, and it's going to be a minor inconvenience to him. Whereas the person, the poor schlub who's got 1 plant production per turn that you just smacked because you want to be fair. Let's take 1 from you and 1 from you and 1 from you.
That's how I do it too.
That's what I say.
Unbelievable.
we're gonna be fair. We're gonna do it one from you and one from you and one from you, and we're all gonna be happy then because nobody got the shaft.
So don't cry about your trees.
It's so sad. It's so sad, man. All right. Well, listen, you guys have a great night, and thanks to you guys for inviting me on the show. It's always fun to talk to people about board games, but especially the two of you. Thanks to everybody out there for listening, and I hope everyone has a great night. Whew. You're losing a plant. You're losing a plant. You're losing a plant. Look under your chair. You lose a plant, and you lose a plant.
Oh my God.